Good afternoon or good morning to you West Coasters, and welcome to Food Processing's webinar, Mitigating Disruption in Your Supply Chain with Predictive Analytics. I'm Dave Fusaro, editor of Food Processing Magazine, and for starters, well, if you're hearing me, you apparently have no problem with the sound. But if you are having any problems hearing or viewing today's webcast, first try to log out and log back in. And if you're still having trouble, explain your problem in that ask a question, request technical assistance box, which should be the second one on the left of your screen. One of our IT people will email you back immediately. And some other housekeeping issues. On your screen, you should see 5 sections. The upper left or audio section allows you to adjust the volume of this presentation. Just hover over one of the faces and you'll see the speaker button appear. Right below the audio section is the Ask a Question box, and that's where you can send a question that we will answer at the end of today's webcast, or maybe at an opportune time in the middle. But at any time during the webcast, you can enter your question there. Now, at the far right of the screen, there is a handouts box at the far right where you can get a complete set of today's slides and several handouts from our 2 sponsors. And the main section, of course, is where the slides will be advancing. If you need a better view, you can enlarge the section by clicking at the box in the top right corner of the section next to the X, or by dragging the borders of a section. But don't hit the X. If you do accidentally close out a section, you can get it back by clicking the refresh button at the left of your screen. It's the top of those dark green icons at the left of your screen. And this webinar will be archived. We encourage you to direct coworkers to the recorded presentation on the foodprocessing.com website. Our webinar today has 2 sponsors. Aptean is one of the world's leading providers of industry-specific, mission-critical enterprise software. And Jack Payne has been with Aptean or predecessor companies for nearly 30 years. So he's seen some stuff in that time. And Ultra Consultants is an independent advisory and consulting firm specializing in enterprise technology. Ultra teams with manufacturing and distribution companies to improve business performance. Dave Leckleitner has more than 30 years of experience in manufacturing technology and automation. Together, they will help you find a way to mitigate disruption in your supply chain with predictive analytics. And with that, let me hand it over to Jack Payne.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Dave, and welcome everyone to our meeting today. And as Dave told you, Aptean provides mission-critical software. One of our strategic industries that we work with is the food and beverage industry. Today, we have over 1,000 customers. We've been supporting enterprise solutions industry for over 25 years. And as we've grown, we are supporting all steps of the supply chain, starting with the farming management, growers, packers, through processing and manufacturing, all the way to distributors. So we like to say that we cover the food and beverage supply chain all the way from farm to fork in what we do. And we also support all sizes of companies within that supply chain, as well as all different sub-verticals of food and beverage. Now, our mission as a company is to solve tomorrow's unique challenges today. Another thing that we like to do is talk about the Aptean Advantage. And we provide more than just ERP software. When you hear the word enterprise software, you typically think of ERP. But because we are a larger worldwide company, we have a lot of other complementary products that go along with the core system of record and traceability being the ERP application. So let me turn it over to Dave, and you can tell us about Ultra now.
Hey, Jack. Thanks so much for that. So yeah, for those of you on the line today that are not familiar with Ultra, this year is our 26th year in operation. Our focus, as Dave mentioned, is assisting North American mid-market manufacturing and distribution companies really better meet operational market challenges and also customer demands. We do that by providing business process assessment and improvement services, technology selection guidance, technology implementation, and finally project management services to customers that would like to transform their operations. We are 100% vendor agnostic, so even though we are participating today with Aptean, we bring to the table a wealth of knowledge, well over 50 vendors in the ERP and other technology space. In the, and if you go ahead and advance it, Jack, if you could. In the past 26 years, our consultants have served as trusted advisors in a wide variety of companies, not just food and beverage. And we've helped them to align their organizations to really industry best practice. Our expertise is helping companies navigate those projects that can be sometimes very challenging and complex. We manage this transformation through potentially 4 key phases of the project. Typically, we'll kick off a project with business process improvement and assessment. That often leads to technology selection, maybe a new ERP solution, technology implementation, and then finally something that we call business transformation or value realization. The consistent thread that we try to emphasize through all of these phases is risk management, change management, and project management. Again, we are vendor independent. So what that means is really you're gaining a partner that helps guide you through vendor education, technology selection, because really at the end of the day, we're out there constantly evaluating and considering everything that all of the vendors are doing in terms of their product solutions. We're also your partner for helping you to discover maybe how to maximize other improvements in your organization as well. The real quick agenda today, first of all, we're going to take a look at the challenges of the past year, and I think without a doubt, all of us can say 2020 was pretty challenging. But we're going to spend a lot of time looking ahead to 2021 and looking at and trying to understand what the trends and outlook for 2021 will be. Hopefully, it's going to be a whole lot better than 2020. We'll take a look at supply chain management, kind of taking a look at, how did the pandemic really affect those supply chains, and are they going to be the same going forward? And really looking at kind of a results approach. How will predictive analytics maybe help us in the future better plan for the unknown? So let's go ahead and jump right on into the webinar. So as I mentioned, 2020 was pretty challenging. In a good year, food and beverage manufacturers face pretty significant challenges, right? We often hear about the pressure to innovate, the challenges to maintain high levels of quality, meeting regulatory and compliance standards, tight margins, changing customer demands, and maybe other channel issues. The list goes on, and that's in a great year. Now, combine that with what we saw last year with COVID. 2020, I like to say, was sort of the perfect storm. So, Jack, I'm wondering if you might lead off today's discussion and take a look back at 2020 and maybe talk to some of those really specific issues that affected food and beverage manufacturers during the pandemic.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And, I think we did more than observe the challenges of 2020. I think we all lived through those challenges and, we, all went into that survival mode last spring as those challenges were presented to us. So if we just take a quick review of the food and beverage supply chain that I talked about earlier, from farm all the way to fork, but then if we look at it in the reverse mode, looking at what I call the demand stream. And this was pre-pandemic, 12 months ago, before any of us knew about this unplanned event that occurred. About 2/3 of the food volume went into homes for each of us to consume and enjoy with our families. About 1/3 from volume went into restaurants and institutions. And over the years, something I had observed in the building up of the supply chain, it was really built for speed and efficiency, all the way from the farm, all the way to the fork. Now, in building for speed and efficiency, I think what came along with that was rigidity and inflexibility with that. And that really hurt us during the pandemic, because all the nodes in the supply chain were connected individually, but they weren't connected all the way from one end to another as the pandemic hit. And we all know what happened is that with the restrictions that came out in the spring, the social distancing, what was hit first was the food service industry, institutions, whether it was restaurants or entertainments or sporting events, not to mention, conventions, business meetings, travel, schools and colleges. So all the food service channels supporting that basically evaporated overnight. And the only, institutions I could think of that were still operating were typically hospitals and long-term care facilities with that. And then kind of early into that survival mode, we started doing some of the curbside pickup and some of the home delivery. My estimate was maybe that demand stream went to 95% plus into homes. And, the balance of that, 5% or less was probably institutions, and a lot of a ripple effect all the way back, through the supply chain with this. And, everybody talked about the shortages that we had in the retail stores, and we all observed that. We'd go in and what we were looking for was not there. Some of maybe the favorite flavors that we had because of SKU reduction, because of capacity constraints, those went away. But something I didn't hear a lot about was the excess supply that was in the institution part of the supply chain. And so what happened to that excess? Well, this was where the supply chain needed to change, and this change did not occur overnight because of the rigid supply chain. But this is where they need to change and divert some of that into the homes through the retail channels with this. We heard stories of farmers that were dumping milk. We heard story of crops not being harvested that were going into institutions and these types of things. But, again, we went through the survival phase and we had that. Now, some of the other things that maybe we didn't observe when we go to the stores or we didn't hear about with the shortages were a number of the labor challenges that were had throughout the supply chain. It was a combination of crowded working and living conditions that we've all seen the stories of COVID running through, some of the workforce. We had some people that were concerned about coming to work, and I know there's a lot of encouragement. There was social distancing and new procedures that had to be put in place throughout various organizations and companies. There were some cases migrant workers weren't able to cross the border to maybe do some of the planning and some of the harvesting. Longer lead times were experienced, particularly in the packaging, and suppliers could not get their goods to market because of these longer lead times. So these were all things that occurred as a result of the challenges that we had during the pandemic last year. And hopefully now we're out of the survival phase and we're into the recovery and the rebuilding stage. So Dave, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. That was a really great perspective and recap to what happened in 2020. I think one of the things that became really evident for me was, companies really had to be very agile and had to be able to pivot their business operations, or, they faced some really severe challenges. I think a lot of people on the call today can relate to those things that you pointed out. So at this point, let's maybe shift gears a bit. We're 4 weeks into 2021. Thankfully, a COVID vaccine has been discovered. We're in the process of getting that out there to the general public. At some level, things kind of sort of are starting to feel like maybe they'll go back to normal. Although, you sort of wonder after what happened, is anything going to be back to normal again? So, Jack, if you had to kind of look in your crystal ball and make some predictions for 2021, what do you think are going to be some of the things to watch out for, especially food and beverage folks? Are things going to get back to normal where we can say that we're facing those kind of typical challenges again, or are we going to expect maybe even newer challenges on the horizon?
Well, Dave, I'm optimistic that with some of the things that are happening with vaccines and what we've learned with social distancing and other things, that some of these challenges are going to continually go away. But I'm not too good at a crystal ball. I've never been too good playing the lottery. I've never been too good playing the stock market. So I like to really look at objective information with that.
Yeah,
and so so last fall we commissioned Reuters Events to do a survey for us, and also along with us we partnered with the Produce Marketing Association and Better Food Ventures, where they surveyed over 300 executives in the food and beverage industry. Some of these were industry leaders. Most of them were actual executives within companies. And in the survey, we had 10 or 12 different topics. And today I want to share with you a few of those survey results. And so one of the questions that we surveyed these executives about was, what did they think was going to impact the food industry? Now, I'm sure that their responses last November were different than their responses would have been last January, because we wanted to see what the effect had and what the thoughts were in this. And, from the percentages, you can tell that you could answer more than one. So, we gave them to say, give us your top 3 things that you think will impact the food industry the most. And to me, the top 2 are pretty much tied for number 1. You got 64% with changing consumer demands and 62% with sustainability. You might as well say that's a tie. So consumers now have a voice today in food. Many years ago, consumers didn't have that voice. We didn't have social media. We didn't have the internet. And basically, consumers had to buy and eat what food manufacturing companies made. But now they're having a voice with that, gluten-free, non-GMO, healthier alternatives, plant-based. And I could go on and on and on with the various consumer demands. And so, the food industry executives said, yes, this is going to be one of the key things that are going to impact us in the next 5 years, along with sustainability. And when I first started hearing sustainability a few years ago, I used to think that dealt more with the farming side of the business. But as I've learned more about it, it's not just the farming side of the business, it's the full supply chain of food and beverage. For example, one company that I've talked with, one of the executives with this, is a produce company. And as they went through, started looking at sustainability, they discovered that over 50% of their purchases did not go into the product, it went into the packaging. And that packaging they were using was not sustainable or recyclable packaging. It was basically going into landfills. So they were able to change this packaging to recyclable packaging, reduce the packaging with this. So this is going to be, big impact. Now, along with that, something that we've been hearing for years, and it continues to stay, top of mind frame with food executives, is traceability. And I think it's traceability with, the new vision that the FDA has come out for better and safer foods, as well as retail chains and food services, asking for better mock recalls and more timely mock recalls with that. So those are the top 3, but I wanted to include in this the top 4, emerging technology. And in my opinion, emerging technology / digital transformation is going to be how we basically address these things that are going to impact the food business and the food industry over the next 5 years from this. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later today. But I thought this was quite interesting. Again, not my crystal ball, Dave, but this is what we researched from the food industry executives. Now, the next thing that we asked them, which kind of goes along with this, is what did they consider the biggest threats in the next 5 years? And it wasn't too surprising that those threats kind of actually matched up to the biggest impacts to the food and beverage industry. And again, sustainability and environmental impact was number one. This again ranked, division of 100%, so 25%. They think that's going to be the biggest threat with that. And then we talked on the previous slide about impact being digital transformation, and that's how that's going to positively affect the food and beverage industry. But executives are concerned about lagging behind in digital transformation, not being able to address, the typical competitive challenges that you have in bringing products to market and everything else along with that, but just lagging behind with that. And that was a tie for changes in consumer trends and habits. So those were the top three. Now, what was interesting with this is not only were those the top three, is you dig down a little bit further to the top four. You say, okay, the pandemic, but then you start thinking about it. And we're asking food executives, what are the biggest threats over the next 5 years? Well, hopefully we make a lot of progress on the pandemic here in the next few months, but they are still thinking. I don't know if this was just because everybody was living in this and they weren't thinking about 5 years down the road, but I think, it's going to have an impact to us, past 2021. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely, Ed. One of the interesting things is if 2020 hasn't taught us anything, is that, we have to have contingency plans in place. And so we're hearing a lot of that from our clients that are developing those contingency plans and finding out ways that they can be more agile, for sure. Absolutely.
Sure. Good, thanks. And so then one of the next questions that we ask, and again, this was not an interactive process, but these were a number of survey topics. And, we found out that digital transformation or lagging behind was such a concern. We then asked, well, what barriers are they seeing to digital transformation? And most of the times when you think about barriers to a challenge you have, it's either usually time or money with this. And it was interesting, because the results were neither one of those were the number one challenge. The number one challenge was knowing how to use digital transformation and how to integrate that into their business. That was, pretty interesting that came out as number one. Now, close behind it, number two, at 22% was lack of budget. So, money was important. But then I thought number three was kind of telling as well. That was lack of awareness of available solutions. And when I think about that, to me, 1 and 3 are related. Not knowing how to use them, not being aware of available solutions. So when you add those together, that's over 40% of the barriers to adoptions with that. And hopefully, things that Ultra is doing, hopefully things that Aptean is doing, and, other thought leaders in the industry are doing is helping, food and beverage companies overcome this barrier, so then they can address digital transformation and not lag behind within the industry.
Yeah, so, again, great information, and 100% agree that, we see it quite often that clients are just not aware of, what's happening out there in terms of technology, how to really leverage technology, even the technology, the ERP solutions that they might even have in place today. So, I would totally concur with that. So, Jack, kind of maybe getting back a bit to the pandemic, obviously your survey has shown, people are still a bit concerned about, the effects of the pandemic long term. I think we can all say that recovery right now is still a work in progress. Maybe, Jack, can you talk a bit more about where Aptean is seeing many of the food and beverage manufacturers? Where are they at in terms of their recovery?
Yeah, Dave, that's a good question and a good topic. And one of the things that we've looked at and tried to study are what are the phases of the pandemic. And, these phases are very much very similar, whether it's dealing with your family and your personal life, it's dealing with your children going to school, or it's dealing with food and beverage companies and how they're trying to survive that. And, the first thing that we had was really that survival mode. We're reacting to the pandemic. Everything was closed down, shut down for a while. food and beverage companies were determined to be essential industries from a manufacturing standpoint. So the first thing was just that survival. How do we protect the business? How do we protect our employees and our employees' families? And how do we protect our own families with this? And there were some guidelines that came out during this process so that we could, quote, restart the economy. We could restart food and beverage with this. And I think during this particular process, I think this, in some cases, it heightened the awareness for the need for digital transformation. You know, how do we react to information? How do we do things? Now, I don't think anybody could really predict the pandemic, but how do we get better information once we get into this so that we can then do a better job of restarting or rebuilding? So I think at a high level, I think a lot of companies today are starting in this rebuilding stage. Now, there may be some, depending upon, you know, what specific food vertical they're in, what channels they serve, and other things that may still be in the end of that restarting process. But I think we're getting more into that rebuilding stage and that rebuilding process. And I think I've seen, experienced some companies that said once we've lived through this and we've rebuilt or we're rebuilding, that we understand, or this has confirmed our need for digital transformation. And some companies have actually said this is actually accelerating our plans and maybe increasing our budgets for this. So we've got a couple of poll questions today for the audience, and I'd like to move into the first poll question that we have today. We'd like to get your input, feedback on how has the pandemic affected your technology and digital transformation spending. 3 simple answers. You've seen no change in it, or maybe you haven't addressed that yet. Because of this, you've either increased your budget or you have decreased your budget. So you should have a screen that comes up that allows you to come in and poll to provide your answer. So this is actually a poll from the prior topic. So the poll is actually showing us is your top business priority, because we talked about those top priorities over 5 years. And let's look at the results to this. Responding to consumer demands and sustainability, that matches pretty much our survey. You know, ours was more to the top of that. Food safety and traceability and digital transformation came in 3rd and 4th. So hopefully I did not influence you with our survey, but we do appreciate your input and your feedback on this. So I'm now wondering what we're going to see on our next survey, if those are going to be in place or not, and maybe I'm going to give you the answer for my survey with this. But we had a poll, and we split the poll out to industry influencers, and we split the poll out to food company executives in terms of, now that you're in this restart, rebuilding phase, you know, what effect has the pandemic had on your technology spending? And in most cases, it was positive. Now, the industry influencers, you know, almost half of them said that this actually increased technology spending. And then, so some of them said there was a little bit of an increase. Some of them said there was a significant increase. So this was 2/3 with this. 10% said there was no change. So you add this together, you know, we're looking at over 75% of industry influencers are saying this is having a positive effect. Almost 20% is saying there is possibly a reduction in change. But then I was really, really interested in saying, well, what did the actual food executives within the food companies say? Overall, the numbers were a little bit different, but the trend was the same. Where when you look at this, almost a half said they plan to increase technology spending, you know, either slightly or significantly with this. And then 37% of them said that nothing has changed. They're still going on with their technology spending. So again, that's almost 80%, whether you look at industry influencers or you look at food and beverage companies that are saying they are not reducing or they're increasing their spending in technology spending and digital transformation. So even though we've had all the challenges of the pandemic and we're still working through those challenges today and trying to recover, you know, I think this has heightened the need and heightened the awareness for this. So, Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, again, Jack, great information. One of the things I have to wonder about as we kind of talk about this is, what if manufacturers, especially, and maybe food manufacturers, are better able to predict some of the potential events, kind of look at the past, obviously, that's really important, but maybe look at that information, but apply new technology, maybe predict what might happen in the future better than what they do today. If they have this additional information, if they have this ability to model things, for example, are they going to be able to better pivot and quickly make the changes that they need, whether specific to their company or maybe how it even affects the supply chain going forward. Before we do that, before we kind of ask a few more questions specifically related to that, let's maybe take another poll and see, kind of looking ahead to this year, how are you planning demand for 2021? So let's go ahead and maybe put up that poll question.
We've got the poll question about demand, how companies are going to plan. I don't have a crystal ball. Let's see what's going to happen.
So, Jack, this is putting us on the spot to see how good we are at pivoting, right?
That's right. It's like we planned this, Dave. So how has the pandemic affected your technology and digital transformation spending? The topic we just finished talking about. And I see the responses coming in with this, and I can go ahead and give you a preview that the responses are somewhat consistent with our survey results. Again, I think that validates our survey with this. So we're, above 80% an increase in budget, 12% no change, and nobody's decreasing the budget for this. In terms of business innovation, business transformation, and the benefits that digital technology can have on businesses, I think this is great news. I think the way we had to come about to get it was not so great news.
Right.
But I think it's good news that people understand the importance of digital transformation and technology. So, Dave, back to you. Tell us about predictive analytics.
Yeah, I think everyone sort of understands and agrees that insight and information really drives the world. Kind of being in the industry and working for various technology vendors, what I saw is that the problem with a lot of that technology and a lot of those business systems, maybe ERP systems in particular, traditionally, they have not been very good at working with information other than really presenting a rear view look at what happened to the business in the past, right? Manufacturers have traditionally spent a lot of time putting data into systems like ERP, maybe doing some level of manipulation of that data, but 9 times out of 10, it wasn't good enough, right? So then they spent a lot of time and effort actually exporting the information back out to Excel, and that became their analytics tool. Definitely not efficient. The data was probably, again, not really useful in really making forward-looking business decisions. From there, though, thankfully, we kind of moved beyond that to kind of really looking at, well, what is this data really telling us, right? Why did the things happen as they did? Again, still sort of rear view window look. And again, we call that sort of the diagnostic phase of business analytics. But now what's really exciting is we're really starting to gain traction and move ahead into the next phase. We're able to actually now start taking that data and applying various algorithms to it to actually predict what may happen in the future. The new solutions, for example, that are coming out are better able to take historical data, still really, really important, but apply various models and use various other algorithms to start actually predicting with some level of certainty what actually is going to happen in the future. The exciting part, as I look at it, is it's not going to stop there. This sort of predictive analytics will quickly start moving into a phase that we are calling prescriptive analytics. The benefit to basically everyone on the call today is that this phase of analytics is going to allow us to even better optimize, right, our solutions. We're going to be able to better optimize the resources that we have, financial, human resources, and really start aligning those proactively to make the best investment that we possibly can. As we look at, and maybe Jack, if you could go ahead and go to the next slide, as we start looking at, well, what does all this mean? We start getting a bit into word soup, right? We start hearing things like machine learning or predictive behavior or visualization. Again, digital transformation. We hear that almost every single day. It's definitely very exciting, for one, but it's also sometimes really challenging, kind of trying to navigate all of these new words and terms and acronyms that we're hearing. So, maybe Jack, from the vendor side of the world, can you maybe provide us more information into analytics, maybe in general, and especially predictive analytics, and what Aptean is doing, and what is Aptean providing to your customers in terms of some of those tools?
Yeah, sure, Dave. And this is the area that I get real excited about is here's the benefits to the business, from technology, from implementing enterprise systems, from going through a business and digital transformation with this. And I've kind of broken this into, three segments or three columns. And I think as you start getting what I refer to as business insights, that's kind of the first thing that before it becomes predictive analytics is you get actionable information with this. Elimination of inefficiencies and bottlenecks. Whether this is in the factory that you can eliminate these bottlenecks or whether this is in the distribution area with this. One of the things I've seen is through one of our applications that does real-time OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, its goal is not so much to give that board that says, here's the efficiency that's currently occurring. Its goal is how does it identify those bottlenecks and how do we eliminate those bottlenecks, that sustainable bottlenecks with that. So to me, that is, definitely actionable information. I've seen a number of companies improve their on-time shipments. Again, actionable information. Having better scheduling tools, having better analysis tools of looking at inventory and capacity availability. I've seen other customers make a big impact on the bottom line of looking at product and customer profitability. And again, in the food and beverage industry, there's a lot of promotions that goes along with sales, and typically you want to take that into consideration as well when you start looking at profitability with this. And in the past, I had experienced companies that had gone through a product or a SKU rationalization, similar to what we saw during the pandemic, with some of the lesser volume products going away, that if I'm at my capacity level, it's probably better to cut out some products or customers, or either say, how do we reduce the cost or how do we increase the revenue of these that are not as profitable as others? So to me, this is actual information. It's kind of the first step. The next step gets into some of those terms you used, Dave, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And, a very common example people talk about is in the engineering or maintenance area, about how do we increase our utilization of our equipment, more uptime, how do we reduce the cost of maintenance, and how do we, and as a result, reduce our product cost with this. So you have each extreme. You only maintain equipment when it breaks, or you maintain equipment too often. What is that sweet spot that gives you that, that best with that? And so this is where, as we get into predictive analytics and using machine learning with this. Now we've also have built in this type of capability into what's called smart machines today. And a very common metric in food and beverage industry is waste and giveaway. And there's a lot of, I'm just going to say pennies, but there's a lot of times more than pennies that goes out the door in that giveaway. And because of regulations, we have to make sure that whatever is the advertised weight or volume on the consumer package, that the product has that in that. And you always, set your limits and your filling equipment so that you make sure that you're doing that, because there's going to be some variation. But how do we reduce that variation? How do we get it down closer with that, reducing that giveaway? How do we reduce that waste? How do we make sure that we don't produce, batches that we have to scrap out? All that goes to sustainability as, one of those key impacts and challenges to the food and beverage industry. Now, one I really like, again, going back and talking about promotions, is trade spending. So how do we look at promotions that we've had in the past? How do we determine the success of those promotions? Success is how much lift, being how much additional sales did you get versus what was the investment or what was the cost for this? Did you break even on it? Did you lose money on it? Or was it really successful that, quote, it made you money on it, and maybe you secured some long-term repeat customers from this? So to me, when we start talking about predictive analytics, I'm taking this information, I'm looking at, what made this particular promotion successful so I can apply that to future promotions rather than just using, gut feel or gut image with that. Now, I think when you talk about prescriptive, and we're going a little bit further than predictive analytics, and in the past, there has been causal-based forecasting. And if you haven't noticed by now, you can probably tell I have a Southern accent. Yes, I'm from Georgia. Yes, I live in Atlanta. And Atlanta, maybe once every 2 or 3 years, we get an inch or two of snow here. And it just shuts the city down for a week. It's like nothing you've ever seen unless you've been here with this. But along with shutting the city down and people taking snow days to try to find a little bit of snow to go out and play with, it has some impact, a predictive impact to the grocery stores. So there are 4 items that are typically sold out in the grocery stores whenever that first snowflake comes down. There's milk, and there's bread, and there's eggs. The 3 basic food groups with this. And, I think a lot of people making French toast with it, but also the 4th item is beer. And so, if you wait about an hour after that first snowflake has come down in Atlanta, you go to the grocery store, they're all sold out of it. So we can start with better weather forecasting that we have. We can start predicting these snowstorms. We can start predicting this is happening, and then we can have where consumers can know the day before I need to pick up a little extra bread or whatever, but also the stores know they need to stock up on the bread to do this. Well, thinking about the pandemic, and how do we look at the pandemic and the data from last year, and how do we take that information and now build that into our demand forecasting for 2021, 2022, 2023. Now, it's going to, I think, take people smarter than me to be able to take all those data points that occurred during the pandemic and help figure out now what the demand is going to be. But I think that's a better way than doing it, than either ignoring what happened in 2020 or just trying to guess or whatever with this. So to me, this starts getting into that realm of prescriptive analytics that you're talking about. Dave, do you think I'm crazy thinking about that? Or do you think there's maybe some way to do that? I don't know.
No, what's really exciting, and I think, you and I have been in the industry, 60 years combined. The amazing thing for me is how quickly we start talking about these new possible technologies and how quickly they are coming to market. Probably better than I do, working with a technology vendor, the cycle time from kind of conception or ideation of what could be to what actually is, it's very condensed. And so on our side, on the Ultra side, it's sometimes really hard to keep up because the technologies and the capabilities are just changing so rapidly. This is an area, digital transformation in general, but definitely the field of analytics, kind of how quickly things are moving and some of the capabilities. It amazes me, even an old dog that's been doing this for 30 years. So it's a really exciting time. You know, it's one of those times when I'm glad to be still at an age where I can really appreciate, you know, what's really going on. It's pretty exciting.
It is exciting, and like you, I've seen that development timeline go, you know, further and further compressed with that. You know, time to market is really getting fast on a lot of technology.
Exactly. Well, you know, looking at the time here, Jack, we're almost near the top of the hour. I don't want to spend a lot of time kind of rehashing what we've gone through. But again, just a real quick review. We started out looking at 2020, some of the challenges, especially with the pandemic, kind of quickly moved into, in general, what we could expect in 2021. And then really moved into kind of that technology discussion and specifically analytics. I just want to extend, Jack, thank you very much for co-sponsoring this today with Ultra. And I'll just throw it back to Dave. And I think we have some questions that have come in the Q&A panel.
Indeed we do, but thank you, Dave, and Jack too, and apologies to you guys and to our whole audience for those hiccups in the survey questions, but you guys navigated through them pretty well. I think we do have time for a few questions, and some of you apparently have already discovered that ask a question box in the middle left of your screen, but you may still type a question in there. We'll attempt to answer it in the remaining time. But here's a question that has already come in from Christine. Do you have more detail into what would go into some of the post-COVID contingency plans?
So, Jack, maybe you can start.
Yeah. Okay, sure. So, you know, I think there are a lot of different things that can occur, and I'll bring this up. We've had events in past history. I was actually on an airplane, actually in the air on the morning of September the 9th of 2001. And, you know, air travel has changed since then. Well, I think the pandemic is going to have long-term effects on things that occur as well. So I think, you know, certain restrictions, you know, certain procedures in food safety, certain types of social distancing is probably going to be with us with this. And I think a lot of it just makes sense with the unknowns. Now, I've talked with some companies that have already taken positive steps and positive effects in terms of facial recognition with mask on, so that when workers come into the facility, you know, it can basically log them in. So a keyless or touchless type of attendance and time and attendance system, monitoring of temperatures are coming in. I remember 15 years ago when I visited a factory, at the entrance there was a employee sitting in a chair, and I said, wait a minute, why is this employee sitting in a chair? What's his job? And the response was, well, his job is to make sure that every employee that comes in the door washes their hand the minimum amount of time with hot soap and water. You know, so that was a way to enforce food safety quite a number of years ago. Well, how are we going to enforce, you know, things that we learned today? And so let's use technology to help enforce that. You know, with temperature monitoring, I think there's probably going to be some changes maybe in workstations and layouts with this. But, you know, and I think the lessons that we've learned from food safety is it's all about the prevention of contamination is really the prescription, or really what you need for food safety. I think going forward, you know, whether it's COVID or some variant coming or other pandemic, is, you know, applying a lot of these things that we've learned from food safety and things we've learned from restriction and social distancing just to be everyday part of going forward to make things safer for everybody. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I probably don't have much to add to that, and I know we have some other questions before we're going to have to end the presentation today. So let's get back to those.
Oh, okay. Another question that's come in: what are some examples of digital transformation?
Dave, I can start with that. Go ahead. You want to start with that one?
Yeah, well, I could start real quickly
go start with that.
But we probably need another 2-hour webinar to talk about that. The easiest thing that I could basically kind of point to, and where a lot of folks will start, right, is traditionally in the old days, and I talked the old days 15 years ago, a lot of times you were printing, for example, paper documentation and giving it to employees out on the production line or whatever the case may be. Not very often do you see that anymore, right? So digital transformation starts very often with, hey, let's try to go as paperless as we can out there in the factory, out there on the production floor. So that's a really good example, digital transformation. We're going to go out, eliminate paperwork on the shop floor. Maybe the employees have terminals that they walk up to, can clock in and out of work orders, can see the latest and greatest regulatory or quality documents, whatever the case may be. Another good example of digital transformation, we talk about machine learning, right? Predictive analytics. Those are all really good examples of digital transformation. It's basically the real simple definition that I use: eliminating paperwork, eliminating manual efforts, and letting technology kind of take over. So that's what I would say. Jack, how about you?
Yeah, and I've kind of tried to stand back and analyze digital transformation, and I've kind of broken it into 3 phases. The first phase I kind of call the basic foundation stage. This is the basic entry to digital transformation, and it starts with having the proper enterprise systems in place. Right. It may be starting with even needing to update what you have, or maybe replacing what you have. Maybe you need to go to cloud computing, but a big part of that is the paperless. That we get rid of all those pieces of paper, and starting just very simple with analytics and business insights, but going from business insights into predictive analytics. To me, that's the foundation. That's the entry point. But once you get that foundation in place, I think the 2 other key areas, the big areas you can go to, and that second area is what I'm calling the adoption of consumer technology now in business. And so a lot of the things that we kind of take for granted consumer-wise, the business. So example, virtual reality. Virtual reality games. I have a daughter who's in the video game industry, very big to them. But as we now take into account augmented reality, helping workers to verify if they're batching a product together, they're putting the right ingredients, recording the lot numbers, recording the weight from this. It's more than just picking in a warehouse with this virtual reality. Now, one of the things I've observed in the supply chain is during this pandemic, there was a lot more of the Instacart shopping. You place your order online, you have somebody go to the grocery store, pick it up, and they deliver it to your house, or you go do the curbside pickup with it. I notice these people going around the store that have a cell phone in one hand, they have the push the buggy, and they're trying to pull products off the shelf and put it in the bags and scan it at the same time. They needed 3 or 4 hands to do this. Well, I think this is a good place to improve the efficiency just in that part of the supply chain channel from that. That's one example. If we get into farms, a lot of times farms don't have Wi-Fi coverage or even cellular coverage, but a lot of the equipment today, farming equipment, comes with tablets on it. And there are apps for tablets, and you can set up Bluetooth networks between equipment on the farms to capture the information and capture the data that once you get back within network coverage, it can now come into an enterprise system with this. And then I think the third one is what I'm going to call advanced digital transformation, proximity tracking, so that when we have workers and social distancing is, and maybe, from their badge or whatever, you have too many workers congregated too close, they can be warned, oh, we got 5 people in this area, we need to have 4 or whatever. That's just a very simple one. But also Industry 5.0, which is, man and machine working together for increased efficiency. And then also something I think is very exciting is blockchain in terms of traceability to connect all those nodes in that supply chain so that at any point in time, all the way back and all the way forward, automatically through the supply chain for everybody that's subscribed to it. And Dave, I could keep talking about this for the rest of the day, but I know we're getting close here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything to add though, Dave, number 2?
No, I'm actually good.
You're actually good. Okay. Well, we are coming up on the hour, so I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. We will be sending you attendees an email shortly with instructions on how to download the slides from today's webinar. We also will let you know when this webinar is available for on-demand viewing, probably within 24 hours. Wait, we have a new feature. If you or your coworkers watch this webinar on demand, if you type a question into that Q&A box, we will get it and forward it to either Jack or Dave or the appropriate party, and they will try to answer it on demand as well. And the next screen will be an exit survey that we hope you all will take. By the way, those survey questions will appear at the top of the exit survey. That'll be on the very next screen that you see. That'll do it for us today. Thank you all for tuning in, but this webinar is over. Thanks.